Well, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Beating the Burnout, Strategies for Finding Joy in Your Job and Life Again. I'm Greg Berry, Director in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since this is a virtual event, please excuse technical issues or glitches that may pop up. If you have issues with your video or audio, refresh your screen or click the reconnect button to get back to the webinar right away. Also, we are recording today's webinar. It'll be uploaded onto our website as soon as we can. Today, we are excited to welcome Dr. Megan Hayes to our webinar series. Dr. Hayes is an associate professor and rehabilitation psychologist in the UAB Heersink School of Medicine. After earning her bachelor's degree in 2008 from the University of North Carolina, Dr. Hayes obtained her Master of Arts in 2013 and PhD in 2016, both in clinical psychology from the University of South Florida. So at this time, I would formally like to welcome Dr. Hayes and turn things over to her. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg, for that introduction. And I just have to ask the obligatory, can you see my screen?
We sure can. You're ready to roll.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm Megan Hayes. I am a clinical psychologist by training, and my job changed significantly in 2020. Kind of an interesting turn of events where I was mainly working in PM&R, physical medicine and rehabilitation over here at UAB Medicine as an inpatient trauma psychologist. But I was asked to come over and join the UAB Medicine Office of Wellness because our own people were really struggling. And one of the primary things that they were struggling with in healthcare was this phenomenon, this occupational phenomenon of burnout. So, of course, this has become kind of like a passion area for me. And I feel so honored to be able to provide my expertise with my UAB Medicine colleagues. But of course, I've kind of branched out over the past couple of years and really try to help everyone that I can with this issue. So I've kind of become a bit of a local expert, and I hope to share some of what I've learned about burnout with you all today. And I really want, to go through these slides, and really at the end, I'm more interested in hearing from you all, hearing about your experiencing, in your occupations, and also to answer any questions that anyone might have. Any of my fans of Reddit know, I am a clinical psychologist, ask me anything. So I definitely want there to be an open forum for that today as well. So I'm hoping that today, some of the things that you'll walk away with are to, number one, identify some of the multi-level factors that contribute to burnout and distress at work. So as you'll learn, there's a lot that goes into burnout, why it happens, and why we see this phenomenon. I want you guys to understand what the signs of burnout are, as well as distress in yourself and your colleagues. And I want you to learn some evidence-based strategies that we know for managing burnout. So burnout itself is not a medical condition, as you'll learn, but there are ways that we can manage it at the individual level. And so I want you to walk away with those. And with that, we can explore some practical tips for hopefully finding joy in your job again, because hopefully at some point you did enjoy it. You went into it for a reason. So how can we get you back there? And of course, at the end, just some interactive discussion and questions. So what exactly is burnout? So burnout is not a medical diagnosis. It's actually a stress response. It's more of a human condition.
So I'm going to stop you right there for a second. Go ahead and share your screen itself. Slides were not advancing. So I don't want to get us too deep in the weeds.
Yeah, for sure. Let me try this. Can you see
There we go. I think we're all set.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you see that when it comes up?
We sure can.
Okay, perfect. So what exactly is burnout? So it's not a medical diagnosis. It's an occupational stress response, and it results from chronic exposure to job stressors. And there's really three main components of it. The first component that we see is purely emotional exhaustion. And with this is the feeling of being emotionally overextended and exhausted by one's work. We also see cynicism and depersonalization. So with this, you see increased feelings of negativity or cynicism related to a person's work. And we can also see this thing called depersonalization, which is more of like a numbing feeling or detachment from a person's job. And this in healthcare is what oftentimes can present as something called compassion fatigue. We also see this third component, which is it's called reduced professional efficacy and personal accomplishment. And with this, What this means is that a person just starts to feel like, maybe I'm not good at this after all. Maybe it was a mistake coming here or doing this job. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. So you're not really feeling good about the work that you're doing either. And a lot of people ask me, well, how is burnout different from just exhaustion? And the truth is there's a lot of overlap. Obviously, one of the symptoms is exhaustion. But with burnout, you're going to see all three of these things in more significant levels. So it's not just that exhaustion, which can be an entirely different profile altogether. You can have a person who has an overextended profile where they're working a lot and there's tons of things piling up to do, but they still really enjoy the work they're doing and they feel good about it. And so that's one thing I wanted to point out, is not everything is burnout just because you're feeling exhausted. So how can we recognize burnout in ourselves and in our colleagues? And I've just got some questions here that are a good guide, and these come from the Mayo Clinic. But again, like, since this is not a medical diagnosis, it's more of a syndrome. These are just some questions that can help guide you to understand, am I having this? But also, a lot of people know when they're burned out from work. It's very rare that someone's like, I really need to take a survey to understand if I'm burnt out. But these questions are a good guide. So have you become cynical or critical at work? Do you have to drag yourself to work in the morning? Do you have trouble getting going for the day for work? Have you started to become irritable or impatient with your coworkers or your clients or your consumers or your patients? Do you lack the energy to be consistently productive? It's very normal to have some lapses in productivity. It's not like we're just productivity machines who can be productive 24/7. But is this a problem day after day? Are you really running behind on your work and finding it hard to concentrate once you do sit down to work? Do you lack that satisfaction from your achievements? So maybe objectively, things are happening for you at work. You're getting promoted, you're getting awards, you're getting things done, but are you feeling like none of it really matters? Do you feel disillusioned about your job? Are you using foods, drugs, or alcohol to feel better or to simply not feel? And again, this is from job-related stress. Have your sleep habits changed? So sometimes that can be a red flag. Sometimes it's really hard to leave work at work. Are you coming home and ruminating about things that happened during the day, what you could have done differently, how you wish that presentation had gone better? And are you troubled by unexplained physical complaints? So these are often termed somatic complaints. So one thing that we see with burnout is sometimes people will report things like they're having frequent headaches, even pain in certain areas. They're having some GI complaints, and they might get checked out by a physician, and there's really no explanation medically for these complaints. And if you are having some other symptoms of burnout, it actually may be related to this. So how common is burnout? So data from the American Psychological Association's 2021 Work and Wellbeing Survey, they surveyed about 1,500 adult workers in the US. And what they found is that there was a heightened rate of burnout in 2021 across practically all professions. 79% of the employees that they surveyed had experienced some type of work-related stress in the month prior to taking the survey. 3 in 5 employees reported negative impacts of their work-related stress. And I think that's really important because that number was up from 2 in 5 in 2019. So certainly we are seeing more negative impact of burnout. 36% of those surveyed reported that they felt cognitively weary, so that sense of really trouble concentrating, and 32% reported that emotional exhaustion, which we know is an important aspect of burnout. And a staggering 44% reported physical fatigue, and that was up from 38% since 2019. Now, we've always known that some occupations are more vulnerable than others to the effects of burnout. Teachers and healthcare workers are just a couple of those that we know are uniquely prone to high rates of burnout. But this was true well before the pandemic. But it seems that it's been much harder to keep up with the demands of caretaking professions during the pandemic. And in fact, this is a staggering statistic that I found. That's really from a separate survey, but this was done, a survey of over 2,500 physicians. It was a collaboration between research from the American Medical Association, Mayo Clinic, and Stanford School of Medicine, as well as the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And what they found is that only 57.5% of physicians last year indicated that they would choose to become a doctor again. So that's really only a little more than half of physicians that would say I would do it all over again. And that number was really staggering for me. And I can speak, from my experiences working with a lot of physicians in our UAB Medicine Office of Wellness. It's been an extremely difficult time in healthcare. And teaching is another one of those, but also human services workers, first responders, anyone who has a really public facing job. We've seen that they are particularly vulnerable to the impact of the pandemic, and that kind of creating a lot more job stress and therefore more burnout over the past couple of years. And another statistic that I found interesting is that more than 2 in 5 workers plan to change jobs in the next year. And that's up from only 1 in 3 who were planning to change jobs in 2019. And you guys have probably seen some of the headlines. We've got the Great Resignation, we've got silent quitting. So we're having a lot of staffing shortages across multiple professions right now, especially in teaching, healthcare, and very public facing jobs. So what are some of the factors that contribute to burnout? According to literature on burnout, there are at least 6 major areas in which a mismatch occurs between the job and the person. So it's the work and the worker. And that relationship is really, really critical. So you'll often hear people saying like, well, is it the work itself? Is it the way the job is structured, or is it the person? And the truth is, it's a little bit of both, but it is actually quite a bit about the job structure. It's really about the mismatch. So workload is one of those factors that everyone thinks about right away, and it's extremely important. The issue with workload is we have high demands, but we have low resources. So we have a lot to do, but not enough time or people or resources to get it done. And of course, we're seeing a lot of that in healthcare right now. One of the second factors, and I want to point out that although workload is extremely important, these other 5 factors are very important as well, and sometimes even more important. And I don't always think that they get enough attention. So the control factor is what we think of as autonomy. And this is how much say you have over the work that you are doing. And then we have this factor of reward. And with reward/recognition, it's not so much about pay and perks per se, although that can be very important for certain groups who are underpaid and undercompensated. But it's also about recognition and reinforcement for a job well done. So are you getting those social reinforcers of, hey, you did a great job on that presentation yesterday. That was really great. Or I really appreciate all the work you did with X client or X patient. Without that, it can be a mismatch, especially if you're a person who really values those words of verbal affirmation. We also have this factor of workplace community, and this is very important. The people that you are in regular contact with at work matter a lot. These are the people you have frequent interactions with. This could be your colleagues, which is a very frequent, one of those things that really matters, the type of support you get to your colleagues that is frequent in the research, but it's also the people you supervise, right? So it's people you might supervise, and even your clients, your patients, or your customers. So we know there's certain areas of medicine that can be more challenging, for example. So people who work in the emergency room tend to have more burnout than those in other specialties or in critical care during the pandemic. And that may be a function of the type of work, but also the type of patients that they see. Is it a supportive, pleasant environment in your division or in your workplace, or is it a toxic one? And we also know that we've seen some mistreatment and violence towards those with very, person-facing jobs during the pandemic. Again, like teaching, healthcare, some of our, human professions. And that mistreatment and violence, of course, can create a very toxic work environment where you're just trying to do the best job that you can. You're just showing up to work. You're trying to do your job, and you're actually not being praised for it. But in fact, you might even encounter like hostility for doing your job day to day, like asking people for wearing masks or trying to help encourage them to be vaccinated. Fairness is another issue, and fairness is one of those factors that would cover issues like discrimination or inequities in the workplace. So do you get acknowledged for your contributions, or do other individuals get the praise for the work that you do and your work goes unnoticed? Does someone else in your office get regular deadline extensions or access to additional resources that you're not getting access to? Well, of course, over time, that might lead to some simmering resentment. Equitable pay and opportunities for advancements would certainly fit into this category as well, as this can make employees feel really disrespected and undervalued and can lead to increased cynicism associated with burnout. If you feel like you're being treated unfairly and that you're not being recognized for the work that you do while others are, of course, you may kind of stop working as hard. You may not be working at your full capacity, which makes a lot of sense. And finally, we have this other overarching category of values. And this area has to do with how well your work aligns with your most deeply held core personal values. And there can be a mismatch when you are asked to do things that you feel are not right, or that you frequently see unethical behavior happening in your workplace. This is really where moral injury can occur. And if you have strongly held values that differ a lot from those in leadership in your organization or your coworkers, you actually may need to look for a better match, because the odds are that this will be a really hard thing to remedy. So I also always like to point out some of the COVID-specific drivers of burnout. So in that last slide, I was talking about what we've seen in the literature since the 80s. So those are the factors that we've seen come up again and again, largely based on the work of Dr. Christina Maslach, who's a psychologist who studied burnout since the 80s. But we've also seen some COVID-specific drivers of burnout. This has obviously been a really unique time. So some of the things that we saw early on that really contributed to burnout were things like we didn't have enough PPI in certain fields. And that's not just medicine, right? Were there enough masks for our teachers? Were there enough masks for students? Were there enough masks for people in our forward-facing jobs that have N95s? We saw increased workload due to staffing shortages and people who were afraid to go to work. We also saw, of course, a risk of infection before we had vaccines available to help mitigate that. And we also really didn't have many treatments that we knew were effective. So there's a lot going on that made it very scary to work during the pandemic, especially when you had to go in person and weren't working from home. But we still have a lot of ongoing issues. I know we kind of think of the pandemic as largely being over, but of course it's not. It's still going on. And so there's this chronicity that we have, this multiple waves of new variants. Of course, we're seeing a lot of mistreatment and violence towards our healthcare workers still. Just the other day, we heard of the shootings at Methodist. Short staffing. We see childcare issues that continue. Anyone who's tried to put their child on a daycare wait list, my gosh, I know about this firsthand. You pretty much have to do it at the time of conception. So there's still a lot of childcare issues that can really get in the way and really contribute to parental burnout, which can bleed into that work burnout as well, because you're just having a lot of trouble juggling all the responsibilities you have. And then again, with those forward-facing, people-facing jobs, issues like politicization of vaccination and masks, and feelings of a lack of support from the government or people's workplaces have caused some workers to become increasingly cynical about their jobs and the public in general. And then now we have this fun issue of inflation, which is driving a lot of changes in work structure everywhere. I know that hospitals are hurting. The price of healthcare is really significantly increasing as well. And of course, many different companies are having to make changes. But of course, there's a lot of benefits to addressing burnout and addressing employee well-beings. For employees, it can really help them to reconnect with the joy and purpose in their work. It can improve their physical and mental health, because we know that burnout is harmful to both of those areas. They're inextricably linked. And of course, for the employer, there's a lot of benefits. There's less staff turnover when you address burnout in your workplace. There's a reduced cost associated with having to continue recruiting and replacing your workers. You tend to see better consumer satisfaction. So whether that's, clients or patients or whatever your workplace is, when people are burned out and they're not putting their best foot forward because they're burned out, of course, that often bleeds into the type of care that they provide. So you get patients, consumers who are not as satisfied. You'll also see fewer errors and improved performance in your employees. So, of course, in healthcare, this presents as medical errors. We're really trying to reduce those. People with burnout are more likely to make medical errors. But whatever your line of work is, if someone's burned out, they're going to make more errors in their job. That's just a cognitive aspect of it, and due to that exhaustion, and also maybe not performing at their best. And therefore, there's less of a need for disciplinary action, which is always a good thing. So that's kind of the doom and gloom of it all. But I do always like to share those factors with people so that they understand that this is really a multi-level issue. And, kind of another question is, people ask me all the time, like, well, what can I do about it, right? And one thing that I always like to point out right away is that you are likely resilient, right? So research has demonstrated time and time again that burnout is not due to some resiliency deficits. It's actually more of this multi-level system issue. And as I mentioned before, it's more about the mismatch between certain qualities of you as a person and the qualities of your job, all those factors that we talked about earlier. And I think a lot of efforts to improve employee well-being, we see them fall flat quite frequently because they're so focused on the individual. So it's like, okay, we're going to measure burnout. Okay, we see so many of you are burnt out, and now you need to take these modules, right, to reduce your burnout and improve your well-being. But you can't do it on company time, so you really need to get resilient in your own time. But it's really a waste of time, honestly, to approach resilience and wellness and decreasing burnout in that way, because it's more about that mismatch, and it's more about the job structure, and it's very rarely about a deficit in resiliency. So resilience, what does it look like? If you are wanting to build resiliency, what it is it's just the process of adapting well in the face of adversity. This could be any kind of adversity. It could be trauma, tragedy, threats, significant sources of stress. It could be family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace, of course, and financial stressors. So if we're trying to adapt well, there are many things that you can do, and I'm about to go over those now because I don't want you to, of course, leave this talk thinking, well, there's nothing I can do. It's a lot about the job structure, because that stuff takes a lot of time. There are things, right, that you can do. There are choices that you can make every day that can improve your burnout, that can improve your well-being, all the way up to deciding to potentially even leave your work and look for another type of job. So I'm going to go ahead and get into some of those evidence-based strategies. Maybe some of these sometimes you don't, right? So we can all use some helpful reminders. So I've grouped this into some domains, and I want to start off with physical health. So this is an area that seems so intuitive, right? We all kind of know we're supposed to exercise, we're supposed to eat well, we're supposed to drink water, we're supposed to, get sunlight, we're supposed to sleep. But oftentimes we treat these basic needs more like nice to haves. So a lot of people tell me, my clients, like, well, I just simply don't have time to do that. I don't have time to get sunlight. I don't have time to work out. I don't have time to sleep. But our physical health and our mental health are inextricably linked. So neglecting these basics leaves us more vulnerable to problems like burnout and compassion fatigue. And this makes it really challenging to find joy in our day-to-day work. So I want you guys to consider pressing that reset button for your body and your mind by creating some specific and realistic goals on your basic needs. And I would encourage you to only focus on one change at a time. So yes, the thought of, a complete overhaul of your physical health and, start to exercise every single day for 30 minutes and getting sunlight for 30 minutes every day and changing your whole nutrition is very daunting. But if you focus on one small change at a time, these things can really add up. So for example, you may try to just aim for 15 to 30 minutes of sunlight daily. That would be a wonderful goal for anyone, because we know that sunlight is associated with more serotonin production. We actually see more melatonin production at night, so we sleep better. So simply the act of getting sunlight can really make a big difference in your sleep as well as your mood. And especially this time of year, as we enter kind of seasonal affective disorder season and we're getting less light during the daytime. So you could consider that. You could do a walk and talk meeting with colleagues instead of meeting inside. It's not too bad in Alabama during the middle of the day in the winter, and you could get some sunlight that way. You could try to go on a brisk 15-minute walk as many times as you can during the day. And another thing I always encourage people to do is maybe try something new, because novelty is really great for the brain. So you may try to do like a yoga class, a spin class, something that you haven't tried before, and you may end up really liking it, but just simply the act of doing something different is great for our brains. In terms of sleep, we really want to try for at least 7 hours of sleep a night. Everybody kind of has different sleep needs, but I really encourage people to set an alarm to go to bed, which, one thing I see a lot of is bedtime procrastination, because people are like, oh, I finally have this time to myself, and I definitely just want to, spend it doing what I want. And they may stay up doing things like watching Netflix, which I totally relate to. They may, kind of scroll through social media, but they spend too much time on it, and then they don't get sufficient sleep. And the cycle kind of repeats the next day, where they feel this cognitive fog. And of course, when we don't have sufficient sleep, our weight can creep up, things like BMI, our mood worsens. So there's a lot, of impact that can happen to our productivity and our physical well-being when we don't sleep enough. So maybe trying to set an alarm to go to bed. Also encourage people to make the hour before bed a screen-free zone. Of course, with burnout, part of the issue is you're always working, right? You feel like you're always working and there's so much work to be done. There's a lot of volume happening, but it's kind of counterintuitive because a lot of people tell me, well, I need to stay up and finish my work and I'll just go to sleep once I finish my work. But they're staring at a screen right before they go to bed. It makes the brain more active, makes it harder for them to fall and stay asleep. So again, they're less productive the next day. So you're actually going to be more productive by going ahead and closing that laptop and having some screen-free time and going to bed in a reasonable hour, because the next day you're going to be more efficient in the work that you do. So just remind yourself, even if your brain says, oh, I need to finish this work before I go to bed, actually, I'm going to get this work done faster and better the next day. And instead of screens, really considering what can you do instead. So you can do like an audio book. You can look at a real book, a paper book. Maybe there's one on your shelf you've been meaning to get to. You can use one of those red night lights that would have that red spectrum light that would help with the melatonin production as you need to go to bed. So those are just a few things. And one of the strategies I like to tell people about is also bath, book, bed. And so you kind of take a warm bath or shower first. That helps to decrease the core body temperature in your body because the heat gets pulled out into the outer layer of the skin, and your core body temperature can drop by a degree or two. And we need our core body temperature to drop by a degree or two in order to go to sleep and to fall asleep. So that can actually help. And then read the book and you're kind of zoning out and going to sleep. And finally, of course, eating well. I'm not a dietitian, but what I can tell you from the psychological perspective is just to pay attention to how you feel after eating certain foods. When we are stressed, when we are burned out, we are more likely to turn to foods that are not so great for us, things that are high in refined carbohydrates or fats and salts. And I would encourage you to think about, well, does this ever really make me feel better? And the answer is probably not. And does it mean that I should always avoid these foods? No, because the all or nothing thinking doesn't help you either, right? It's okay to have certain foods like pizza or a burger, right, from time to time. So you don't want to eliminate those, but really try just mindfully eating. So what is the better choice I could make this evening, right? So if you just absolutely must get fast food tonight, that's all you really want to do or have time for, then okay, what's like the best choice that you can make at this fast food? And always you could try mindful eating as well, which would, involve basically slowly eating, removing all distractions and really paying attention to that active eating and igniting all the five senses. What does it smell like? What are some of the flavors that I can taste? How does it feel as I chew and swallow? And really paying attention to that act can integrate this great skill of mindfulness into your eating routine as well. In terms of emotional health, which again, everything I just talked about is also related to your emotional health because the physical and emotional are inextricably linked. But to address emotions directly, one of the things I like to share with workers is to connect with your values. So why is it important to know your values? Because knowing your values is like having a North Star to guide you back in the right directions when you are caught in a storm. Having values means that whatever adversity, disappointments, losses, and even trauma that you've had at work do not take away from your life's greater meaning and your purpose. So the adversity that we've experienced in the pandemic does not detract from our core values. And maybe that's helping others or contributing to your community. And it may be difficult to remind yourself of what those values are sometimes, but they can ultimately help you to find meaning in your work when you are really feeling lost and can therefore reduce your burnout. It's also a great tool when you're trying to make a decision of whether you're going to do something or not. Is this action consistent with my values? This can help you decide if you're going to agree to do that thing or not. Another strategy is to reconnect with your meaning. And I call this remembering your why. So, one thing I saw during the peak of the pandemic in our hospital was there were a bunch of signs up saying, remembering my why or remembering our why. And hospital workers would post, kind of a little card as to why they are still in healthcare and still doing the job or why they came and did it in the first place. And for every why, there is a how. And that is something that I really like to remind people of. Without, motivation is kind of a nice to have, but purpose is necessary. So write down inspiring stories from your work or something that you feel like went really well. Consider the unique skills that you bring to the table and the ways that you, as an individual, make a difference in your workplace. Something that you bring to the table that you feel particularly good about. And this doesn't have to be a work skill set. This could be that you're the person on the unit that always makes everyone laugh. or you're the person in the office that really knows how to keep calm as it comes time for crunch time, right? Or in crisis time. So what do you bring to the workplace and the dynamic that is a unique contribution? And also, I encourage folks to really try to connect with their emotions. You want to try to pay attention to how you're feeling, to what you're thinking, because what we think matters and it can impact how we feel, right? That cognitive behavioral model. A great way to do this might be journaling, right? And there is no right or wrong way to journal. You might just do 10 minutes with your coffee in the morning, but just try to be still with it. Try to take stock of those desires. Maybe add gratitude to your daily routine. You know, say 3 things to your partner at the end of the day that you're grateful for in that day, and they do the same. So really trying to promote some of that positive psychology as well, but to also process through things as they happen, which journaling can be a great tool for. Kind of a side note, but I always like to share with people, this is one of my biggest pet peeves as a psychologist, but positive vibes only, right? This is something that I see a lot of on social media. A lot of people will say that, even in the setting that I work with in the hospital, to patients, you know, it's got to stay positive. And well, that's a great idea, and I understand where they're coming from. These things can often promote toxic positivity. One thing we know from the research is that when we set happiness as a goal, we actually tend to be less happy over time. So don't try to wrestle or push aside any of your negative, quote unquote, emotions. All of our emotions are actually useful. It's also important not to judge our emotions. So I hear a lot of people say, well, I shouldn't feel angry about this. I shouldn't feel sad. Why am I like this? You know, and it's really important to not judge yourself because, first of all, you can't help it, right? These are automatic responses. So why are you mad at yourself for something that's really quite automatic? And the other issue is that when we push aside these difficult emotions, we don't develop the skills to deal with the world as it really is, right? And not just as we wish it to be. And this skill is called emotional agility. And so when we're able to kind of see these emotions as they are and move through them properly and to feel them, right? Because pain is inevitable, suffering is not. But when we're able to feel that, we do build that skill set for resilience. And happiness, it's experienced as a byproduct of living a values connected life, right? So don't set happiness as the goal. Just live a life that is according to your own values, as we talked about earlier, and you're more likely to feel happy. This is just a quick technique that I like to share with people. It's called 5-4-3-2-1. It is a mini mindfulness technique. I also think of it as a grounding technique. So let's say it feels like things are spinning out of control at work. All you have to do is just reroute yourself in your 5 senses. So you can start with a deep, slow breath and then just name 5 things that you can see around you. And you don't have to say it out loud. You can just say it to yourself. And what are 4 things that you can feel or touch? What are 3 things you can hear? 2 things you can smell? 1 thing you can taste? And what this does is it roots you back into the here and now. It gets you out of your head and into your body and into that sensory experience. So it incorporates mindfulness into the day, and all it takes is like a minute or 2, right? It's a very quick grounding exercise. So when it feels like things are spinning out of control, it can really help interrupt that cycle of just stress and get you just into the here and now. And a great way to do this, you can do it just right from your desk, right? Because we're not judging our experiences or what's around us, even if it's drab gray walls like I have. But, you know, what do you see? What can you smell? And you can do this outside as well, you know, if you're taking and trying to get some sunlight. So let's talk about social health for a minute. So of course, when work gets a little wild, it can be hard to reconnect with people socially, but we know that social support is one of the most protective factors for things like burnout and also mental health concerns like depression, anxiety, PTSD, that social support can make a big difference. So taking that time to reconnect or connect with your family and friends is really important. So try to schedule time in the week to maintain contact with an existing friend or to reconnect with an old friend, right? Sometimes as we schedule these things, as the time comes in our calendar, we may kind of dread it, right? And that's okay. You don't need to judge yourself for feeling that way. I know I've been there too. But a lot of times afterward, we're really glad that we did it. It just felt so nice to reconnect with that friend, or to talk about some things we hadn't even thought about in a while, or to just get another perspective. And remember that it's really not about the quantity of friendships that you have. So you may not know many people around your city yet, right? Maybe it's Birmingham or wherever you live. So you may not know anyone yet, right? But it's okay because the quantity of your friendships doesn't really matter. It's about the quality. So even if you don't know anyone in the city that you're in, can you reconnect with some old friends across the country, from back home? Can you FaceTime, maybe schedule a visit? That matters a lot. So do you have at least one person that you can talk to? A partner, a friend, a family member, whatever it might be. And I also like to encourage people to build in regularity. So this makes it easier to remember. So maybe you can plan something with friends that is always on the schedule at least once or twice a month. Another great way to do this is with like date night. So if you have a partner, to protect your relationship, it's really important to focus on that quality time. So try to build in regularity. Like, all right, we're going to have a date night the first Friday of every month, and we're really just going to focus on each other. We're going to put the phones away, and it doesn't have to be some big night. You can also just connect, schedule time, couch time, 10 minutes into the workday. You both put your phones away and you just focus on each other. Maybe that's a great time to practice 3 things you're grateful for, or engage in some questions to continue getting to know your partner, right? Even if you've been with your partner for 30 years, always remaining curious, right? Keeping those communication lines open is really important. So even though work is stressful, resist the urge to keep it all to yourself. Definitely open up, share with others. There's a lot of value in sharing your experiences. And you can also do something new. I talked about novelty earlier, but maybe ask a friend, I've never been to a pumpkin patch before. I know it's been pumpkin patch season. Let's try one out, right? Or let's go to a Christmas tree farm or something like that. Let's do a sushi class. Let's have a chef come and teach us how to, cook something new. But novelty is really great for the brain. It can be really refreshing, and it can help with things like burnout. So in terms of this other area of spiritual health, a lot of times when people come to me, we've kind of gone through all these other domains. They're doing pretty well with their wellness behaviors, but there's still something missing. And oftentimes it might be this piece. So if you feel like you've really got all these other things on lock, you do pretty well in these other domains, and you're really just not sure why you're still feeling not so great, maybe it's related to your spiritual health. And when I say spiritual health, this doesn't have to be any type of particular religion. There are many ways that you can re-engage with your spirituality. So you can, first of all, try to reconnect with your beliefs, or connect with your beliefs, whatever they are, whatever religion or, whatever you're interested in spiritually. So this might be prayer. It may just be as basic as like mindfulness meditation. It could be just simple, quiet times of reflection. You could read scripture if that's important to you, sacred writings, even philosophy. Another thing that, my personal favorite is just getting out into nature and reconnecting with the earth. And with that, there are many opportunities to experience all, right? Just watching a storm come in and just looking about how amazing that can be, right? Watching the rain fall down, going to the ocean and looking at the ocean and just seeing how amazing and expansive that is, and experiencing that feeling of awe. Even simple stuff around us, like, wow, those, flowers, it's just amazing how many different colors those are. I've really never noticed that before. That wake up and smell the roses. There really is some truth to that. And it's also connected with that mindfulness concept. In terms of professional wellness, one thing we talked about is making that connection to purpose in your work. Another strategy, this kind of goes back to thinking about your why, but you could try writing just one reason that you chose X as your career, right? Maybe it's teaching, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's being an attorney. Why did you choose that as your career? It may be hard to think of, when you're in the thick of it, but when you first started out on that journey, what was it that drew you to that profession? This one's really important, but creating healthy boundaries between your work and non-work areas. If you are feeling burned out by your job, or you're finding yourself dreading the workday, practice leaving work at work by creating some better personal and professional boundaries. You might say something like, I'm leaving my students at work. I am leaving my clients at work, to yourself before you leave for the day, or having a box on your desk that you symbolically put all work-related thoughts and emotions in before you head home. You can also create contextual cues, because the brain loves context clues, that encourage separation between your work and home lives. So you might, for instance, leave all your paperwork at the workspace before you go home. You might take off your work clothes immediately as soon as you get home. This is something I always encourage my healthcare workers to do with their scrubs. And just do something enjoyable, like light a particular candle, start cooking, go on a walk outside, listen to some music. But For those who work from home, I know this can be more challenging. So make sure that you have a separate workspace that is different from where you spend your leisure time at home. So I really encourage people to have only one space at home that they do their work from, a particular desk or a setting, as opposed to everywhere being the workspace. Like you work on your bed sometimes, your couch, and so on, because the brain really struggles to switch gears in that way. You can also work on focusing on work activities that give you the most meaning, that you enjoy the most. You can also do some self-monitoring of your well-being. There's a lot of scales out there that can help with this, like the Maslach Burnout Inventory, Quality of Life Survey, the Well-Being Index, and also very important to recognize when you need help and get it. So burnout it's a phenomenon, right? It's a work-related phenomenon. It's not a medical diagnosis, but it can open the door to some other difficulties like anxiety and depression. And so I would encourage folks, when you do notice those symptoms, to reach out to see if you are feeling depressed or anxious, and go ahead and get help. And there's a lot of programs. Many employers have an employee assistance program. That would be a good place to start, just to see and explore. But also getting help from your supervisor. Like if work's not working out for you, what can be changed about your job? Because as we talked about, there is sometimes just a mismatch there. So we know work-life balance is very important. There's a lot of positive benefits of that. Employees who engage in these things tend to have more job satisfaction. They tend to be healthier. They're taking fewer sick days. They have fewer negative thoughts and feelings about their work, and ultimately less burnout. But if I could give you one strategy, if I had to really summarize it to one thing, I know I've given hopefully a lot of helpful things today, is to maintain your boundaries at work, okay? Because a lot of times your work is not going to do that for you, right? So what does this mean? This means don't sign up for extra work, right? It means practice saying no, right? I know that can be really hard to say no to your boss, but if you don't say no to some things, you're not going to be able to say yes to the things that you really enjoy, that are consistent with your values, and that do make your work more meaningful. You also want to learn to delegate. I have problems with this too, right? I'm kind of a perfectionist. So for me, it's hard to say, okay, can you do this project or help me with this project? And to feel like, okay, it's going to get taken care of the way I would do it, right? But let go of that. Let go of that perfectionism. Go ahead and delegate. Now it's up to them. And it doesn't have to be exactly as you did it. What's often most important is that it's good enough and that it gets done. Also, this is very important to use your paid time off. Americans have been taking less and less time off for decades. And research shows that most people take about 1 week less of vacation than they did 40 years ago. And during the pandemic, a lot of workers can feel shame or guilt when considering time away because of all the staffing shortages that we're seeing in many different professions. But many studies have demonstrated the health benefits of taking vacation, even a decreased risk of heart disease and other illnesses. We see decreased depression and anxiety, as well as reduced stress. So simply taking some time off can really go a long way in re-energizing you. And also, here's another one: don't respond to messages after hours. So, sometimes we feed in to that workload. Like I said, we have that belief that I've got to keep responding to these messages. I've got to go ahead and get to this, or, I'm gonna have to respond to it tomorrow. But definitely separate that work and home life. Just don't respond to emails that are sent after hours. There's a tremendous amount of value in our shared experiences. I talked about social support earlier, but also just the support of our colleagues and our peers is incredibly important, because there's so much value in those shared experiences that we have. No matter how introverted you are, we all require social connection. We are social animals. And when we have those shared feelings of vulnerability and stress, it can lead to some of the strongest social bonds. And we've definitely seen that in medicine during the pandemic. So these are just a few statistics, but this is all about healthcare. However, we know that this translates to other professions as well, that typically having strong supervisor support is very protective, and strong colleague support, as I mentioned with that slide in the very beginning about factors that contribute to burnout, community is a huge one. So is your workplace a supportive one? Is it a workplace where you feel like that you can share, right? And burnout can be contagious. So shifting the morale of the entire group or your unit or your office is really important. And if you found that you've done all that you can and others cannot or do not want to improve the relationships in the workplace, then it may be time to consider a job change. I always include a slide about crisis resources. So again, burnout is not the same thing as depression, is not the same thing as anxiety, but sometimes with burnout, again, it can lead the door to some of these other things. So if anyone on this webinar is struggling with any feelings of severe depression or thoughts of suicide, there's so many resources available to help. These are just a few of the mental health resources available 24/7, the 988 suicide and crisis line. All you have to do is type in 988, but you can also text it. You can chat. There's a crisis text line that all you have to do is text. I know I myself do not enjoy talking on the phone all the time. So if you're more of a texter, that's a resource just to get some help. And then SAMHSA's National Helpline is great because they help connect people with treatment. And I just want to say thank you all. I assume you're on this call because you're experiencing some type of burnout in your profession, or if you're a student, and student burnout and study burnout's real as well. And I found this quote, and I think it really highlights, especially over the last 2 years, what a lot of people have been going through. And it says, we the willing, led by the unknowing, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. We've done so much with so little for so long. We are now qualified to do anything with nothing. And I'm sure many of you are feeling that way. So thank you for all of the work that you do. And finally, I really, like I said, wanted to reserve a lot of time for just hearing about your experiences and questions. We have about 15 minutes, but also I'm here. I'm a clinical psychologist. Ask me anything. So I'll just kind of open it up now for anything that people have to say.
All right, go ahead and advance your slide to your contact information. I know there are people that were asking for that in the chat, if you don't mind, Dr. Hayes.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the very last one. And for people with questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat. We will facilitate there. There's the information. We'll keep that up here for a little bit so you can reach out. Also, if you are part of the HCM 405 class and you're looking to receive a certificate, we don't do certificates, but we will confirm your attendance with your professor. So go ahead and email alumni.uab.edu with that information. I did drop that in the chat as well. So as we get questions coming through, I'm just going to kick things off. So how long after experiencing burnout do we have to act? I mean, is it immediate? We don't want to let things fester, but things may turn better, right?
Yeah, so I think that as soon as you recognize feelings of burnout in yourself, that you should start to take action. And you can always start first with some of the strategies that I mentioned today, because sometimes, since it is about the relationship between the worker and the work, sometimes there are, a lot of things that are in our control. So I know for myself, when I was feeling kind of more burned out years ago, I realized I was saying yes to pretty much everything, because I have a tendency to be a people pleaser. And maybe some of the folks on this call also have that tendency. And I wanted to say yes to everything because I didn't want to let anyone down. But then what I realized is that over time, and I see this a lot with my clients, I wasn't able to do any of these things that well because I was stretched so thin. So starting to identify something that could be actionable is really important, and we can always start with us as an individual. So is there something I could do to make my situation with burnout better? Can I just start saying no more often? Can I not moonlight? Can I not take on these extra shifts, right? Can I just say no? And I know that's really hard, but that's a really great skill to practice. And it's a good time to do it because we have shortages in a lot of areas, right? So people are often going to be trying to keep you. So just say no is one thing. But also, I think as soon as you can, if you think it's more job related, right? The structure of your job or things that's just really dragging you down, talk to your supervisor, talk to leadership, see what can be done about your job, and do that sooner rather than later. Because there often are things that can be done. And I found that a lot of employers can be really responsive.
To go along with that, how long does burnout typically last? Because it's something that can be short time experience. It also can last a while.
Yeah, so it pretty much will last as long as that mismatch is occurring, right? So as long as there's a significant mismatch in one of those areas, those 6 areas, domains that I talked about earlier, it's going to continue, right? So, there's all this focus on wellness programs, which is great, right? Like, so we think about the Amazon warehouses, they put like Zen meditation booths in these Amazon warehouses, right? But the job is still the exact same, right? And so what's that going to do? Well, not very much, right? And so an intervention like that isn't going to probably change anything, right? But it's just as long as that mismatch is there. So until the job structure is changed, or if there's an issue of recognition, or if there's an issue of volume, that's the main issue, right? Too much to do, not enough resources. Until that changes, then the burnout will likely persist.
Got it. So, with more people working from home full-time or even part-time, separating that home from your work, the balance, it can be challenging, not just with young kids who probably should be in daycare anyway, but even with older kids. So how do you deal with the older kids who, they're easily accessible because they have a car and they can get to and fro? So how do you really kind of ground them and separate them? You'd think it'd be easy, but this is something I experienced at the beginning of COVID. They were in and out. It's like, no, I'm at work. So
yeah. And I think that is one reason, another good reason to have a protected workspace if you are working from home that is just for work. And that, a lot of people, what I see is they will be working like right in the middle of everything from home because it might be more comfortable. Like they'll be on the couch in their living room taking calls, or in the bed taking calls. So if you're a person who is working almost entirely from home, you should really have a comfortable workspace that is just for work. And, talk to your, nearing adult, but teenage children, right? Talk to them about, hey, like, this is, dad's or mom's workspace. And I'm going to be, when this sign is up, right? Because they'll probably do better with a visual cue, right? Attention kind of wanes. So when this sign is up, I am working and not to be interrupted, right? So that's always an intervention to do as well. But another good reason not to work in the middle of everything in your house.
You think it would be easy.
Yeah.
Oh, my Lord. Regarding finding happiness, in living according to our values, what is a strategy for dealing with contemplating abandoning one's values?
Can you rephrase that?
So I think, and this person, if they want to go ahead and drop that in the private chat that they asked originally, I think they're looking at possibly leaving some of their values behind and making a shift. And I could be totally wrong. Do you suggest sticking to your values, or is it okay to shift from time to time?
Yeah, that's actually a really excellent question. And in fact, I would say, especially recently, over the last 2 years, many people are experiencing a shift in their values. And it's not unusual for those values to shift over time and kind of like priorities shift over time. So, for example, for some people, we've seen during the pandemic that their career was really high up there originally, like before the pandemic. It may have been like their number 2 value on the list of the top 5, or even number 1 for some people. But what they realized right after they had to cut back on work, or started working from home, or they were spending a lot more time with their family, or their lives were threatened due to like COVID related issues, right? It really changed their perspective. And so career kind of went down the list and maybe family went up. And so I would just really encourage everyone to continue to take stock of your values, because they can shift, and what's important to you can really change over time. I myself, I had a child 6 months ago, and that was my first child. And so I will tell you firsthand that, a life change like that can really move things around on your top priorities and your values list. And that's perfectly normal. And what you'll want to do is make sure that what you're doing at work aligns with that new set of values. And can you talk to people about how to make that work, that relationship between you as the worker and your job?
I'm going to try to get this one asked properly. Person accidentally put an enter in there, so it's 2 different things. This person is not a healthcare worker, but they've been on the front line customer service for 27 years. So their problems are a combination of COVID-related pressures, as well as just doing this for so long. So they're too young to retire. They don't want to retire quite yet. There's not a lot of room for a vacation or vocation shift at this point. So is there any advice for her?
Well, I would always start first and foremost with that person's, I think first and foremost with the individual, right? So like, are there things, when our job starts to be kind of a drag on us and we start to have some of that mismatch, we're feeling burned out again, like, are there things that I'm doing or not doing that would be beneficial, right, to me? Am I not prioritizing sleep? Am I not doing things that I enjoy? Am I not separating my work and my home life? Am I having difficulty when I get home from work ruminating on what happened that day or how rude that customer was to me? Can I journal? Can that help me? Can that help me to kind of redirect my attention or to improve my well-being? So that's a start, right? But also making sure because people cannot read our minds, right? And sometimes we assume that there's nothing that we can do about our jobs, but at least giving it a try of talking to a direct supervisor or the people in charge per se, right? So what can be done about my job? Here's what I'm experiencing. I really value being at this company. Of course, like I don't want to leave right now. Can we make this work? Like what are some areas that you think would help your job, and talk to your supervisor about those. What do you want to be doing more of and less of? Now, you may not be listened to and your needs may not be met, but unless we ask and we're assertive about asking, we don't even give ourselves that chance.
So the last one comes into the chat. Do you have any tips for working these suggestions that you've had into a busy schedule, or thinking about them when things get the most stressful?
Yes. So both of those things I have some ideas for. So, like I said, I work in healthcare, and, probably one of the busiest groups that I work with are medical residents. And I work with medical residents who tell me that they can't even get 15 minutes of sunlight on a work day, right? And so we have to get very creative sometimes with what I consider kind of like micro changes to their day and their well-being, because also with medical residents, there's not a lot of autonomy right there in kind of the structure of the job. They don't have a lot of say over their schedule and things like that because they're preset. So one thing I would say is to keep your goals small. Like if you're really, time is a very valuable resource. And if you're already working a lot of hours and there's not a lot of extra time, be extremely efficient with your time. Number one, definitely take stock of, are there any areas that I'm actually, I don't want to say wasting time, but am I spending time that could be better spent? So almost all of us are probably guilty of spending too much time on social media or watching Netflix. And that's not to say don't do it, but there's a lot of great tools to track that now. So you can kind of track on a lot of these smartphones how much time I've been spending on certain apps, and even set limits and alarms. And guess what? That time can then be used on something that would really help your well-being. So once you've kind of reached your limit on social media, now I'm actually going to focus on, I'm going to do a 15-minute workout, right? There's a lot of great workouts online. They're like in intervals of 5, 10, or 15 minutes, right? So if we can just get rid of some of this excess time, shave it off, and just quickly get it in, right? That's great because you've done something even so small, right? It adds up over time. So don't fall into the myth of I don't have time, because almost everyone can cut some of the fat, as I say, but cut some time somewhere in their day, right? And find that time, make that time, and prioritize it. And don't get caught up with the all or none thinking of like, oh, well, if I don't have my hour to do my routine, then it's not worth doing anything at all. It is definitely worth it, right? 0 minutes anything's better than 0 minutes of wellness.
2 more questions, and I want to be respectful of your time, and then we'll let you go. This person is a supervisor of multiple remote employees. Do you have suggestions for things to do in person or virtually to help them feel a part of the group? Any fun virtual ideas that would ease the feel of any possible burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think one idea is you could always plan something in person, even if they're virtual employees. So you could, a lot of people do like a staff retreat of sorts, an employee retreat. That's always a fun thing where people get to know each other, in a kind of a nice gesture where there's like food or drinks or whatever it might be. And that really helps with cohesion, because having those in-person interactions whenever possible, there is something different about those. And it really helps to build those social relationships and cohesion, and people are more likely to open up. So if you can, I think that is a good idea. I think virtually, there's a lot of ideas out there. If you just like Google, ideas for virtual team building and things like that. But, always asking questions and trying to steer away from, if you did like an online retreat or something for a half day, or a get to know you session or a team building session virtually, I'm trying to avoid the one fun fact, right? I think you can, there's a lot of other fun games out there, even like rooting into what is one of your like fondest memories, like what are some of your most deeply held values, right? Really getting into some of those deeper questions can help, I think, strengthen the team.
Due to burnout in a career field for over 20 years, what are some questions to ask yourself as you consider a career change?
Yeah, so I think it all comes down to that mismatch, right? And I think it comes down to you've tried everything. Like you've looked at yourself as an individual. You've really tried to compartmentalize work and life. You are really doing great with your wellness behaviors. You've talked to your employer again and again. There's been no changes to your job structure. And, maybe it's a toxic work environment. Morale is extremely low no matter what you do to try to contribute or change it. And I think at that point, when there's a fundamental mismatch and you've seen a lot of evidence that it's not going to change, it's time to consider a career change for sure.
Great information, Dr. Hayes. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us and giving us this advice and kind of ways to beat the burnout in your career.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for coming and listening.
Thank you. And just a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be uploaded on our website as soon as possible. Be sure to register for other upcoming webinars following Thanksgiving. Join us for Charles in Charge. What's next for the British royal family as we explore all things royal. On Tuesday, December 6th, we'll be joined by royal podcaster Rachel Birchfield. Then take part in setting the tone, effective communication, and positive energy in an organization with Make-A-Wish Alabama President and CEO Tracy Bennett Smith on Wednesday, January 11th. On Wednesday, February 15th, we'll welcome Dr. Greg Natello for Epidemic of Chronic Disease, Infinite Causes with Finite Disease Expresses, as we get an introductory overview of current thinking for causes driving our modern day epidemic of chronic disease. Then on Thursday, March 9th, liven up your home as part of preparing your houseplants for spring with Caitlin Hastings. Here tips for repotting and fertilizing your plants as they come out of winter dormancy. And on Tuesday, March 21st, we will host Superheroes and Risk-Taken Behavior in Young Children with Dr. David Schwebel and Casey Morgan. Discover how the superhero culture can affect our children. You can register for all of these and more online at alumni.uab.edu/events. Finally, let us know your thoughts. What did you think about today's webinar? What topics would you like to explore in the future? The QR code on your screen takes you to a short survey that you can complete. Once again, thank you so much for Dr. Megan Haynes. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. And as always, go Blazers.